Hi, and welcome to Axelbank Reports History and Today, conversations with America's top nonfiction authors and why their books matter right now. I'm Evan Axelbank, and today we're going to speak with Hampton Sides, the author of The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and the Fateful Voyage of Captain James Cook. He's written 8 books and is a member of the Society of American Historians. Hampton, thanks so much for being here.
Great to be with you.
Before we start our interview, I want to invite listeners to go to our Patreon page to ask for your support in keeping the show going. Go to patreon.com/AxelbankHistory. We will donate part of your contributions to a charity for children's literacy. And also, AxelbankHistory.com is designed by Nikki Rideout of Ellie Claire Designs. It has our most recent episodes, our featured episodes, and a link to that Patreon page. So check out Nikki's work. July of 1776 is best remembered, at least around these parts, as being the month that the Declaration of Independence was adopted by the Continental Congress, kicking off a 250-year now experiment in self-government with varying degrees of success. The Revolutionary War was already a year old. On July 12th of that fateful month, though, 8 days after we commonly think of the Declaration as becoming official, something else important happened, and that is that a 100-foot-long ship called the HMS Resolution shoved off from Plymouth, England. It wouldn't come back for 4 years. First of all, Hampton, can you try to verbalize what sea travel was like in those days? No GPS, no engines, no running water, no air conditioning, no weather forecast. Explain to us, what was it like to be on the high seas back then?
Yeah, you have to ask yourself why these sailors would not only go out on these incredibly long and difficult voyages, but they would often come back, not know what to do with themselves, and want to get right back on the next ship going out to the far corners of the world. Something that was addictive about these voyages, despite the fact that the conditions were deplorable. They were swinging in their hammocks right next to each other, down in these stinky, mildewy holds full of cockroaches and rats, and eating horrible food, the stench, the close proximity for many years. I would never want to do this sort of voyaging myself. I suppose that um, there is kind of in the readership of these nautical tales of woe. It seems like there's a lot of people who love these stories because like thank God someone else is doing it for them, right? Like they thank God they did this so we don't have to suffer in this way. I don't I can't imagine doing it myself. I'm actually a bit of a claustrophobe, and I don't think I would have signed on for
Have,
any of these voyages. Now, Captain Cook had 3 of them around the world. My book focuses on his third and final one.
have you been able to drill down as to why there was this addictive trait among those who wanted to keep going and going?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of little things you can say. Life on land in England in the 1770s for many of these guys was not very uh, pleasurable. These are mostly poor guys. Uh, their alternatives were not great in terms of employment. Um, People didn't live very long back then. At least this brought a kind of, a possibility for true adventure. And then, when you drill down even further, I think you have to recognize that for many of these guys, the it really gets down to this sense of pure discovery, this curiosity of possibly going to a place that has never been seen before by man, certainly never seen before by Europeans, encountering new species, new lands, new people was a big part of the charm and fascination for these guys in
Just
the
kind of
end.
an opportunity that they couldn't get on land.
Absolutely. Also, a lot of sailors, as hard as it is, they become accustomed to the rhythms, the protocols, the structure of daily life of a Navy ship. Um, and when they get back on land, they're lost. They are confused. They there's some kind of comfort, as dangerous and as deplorable as the conditions are. There's some sort of comfort in the rituals
Mm.
of maritime existence.
You use this poem from Samuel Coleridge to
Mm.
set the book up. Alone, alone, all alone, alone on a wide sea. I think that's alone four times.
Mhm.
Exclamation point, all alone on a wide sea.
Wide,
And
wide sea.
wide, excuse me, on a wide sea, right? Four alones and two wides. And never a saint took pity on my soul in agony. How does that quote set this book up?
Well, that's from Coleridge's poem, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, one of the most famous poems of the 1700s in England. Uh, he, Coleridge, his tutor at Oxford, maybe it was Cambridge, I think it was Oxford, had been Cook's astronomer on Cook's second voyage around the world. So he heard a lot about Cook from his tutor. And I believe, and a lot of scholars have um, put it out there that perhaps the Ancient Mariner, the subject of this poem, is really referring to Captain Cook, because something was wrong with Captain Cook on his third voyage. He was a different man from the first two voyages. He was alone much of the time in his cabin, brooding, not collaborating with the other officers very much. He had a terrible temper. He was starting to use the lash in, on his own men, and also showing a lot of cruelty that he hadn't shown in previous voyages to the indigenous people that he was encountering. So I think that poem kind of gets at some of the pressures and difficulties of command, but also this notion uh, that he was experiencing some kind of existential crisis that plays out and deepens throughout the course of the voyage and leads ultimately to his spoiler alert, to his very radically graphic, very difficult death on the Big Island of Hawaii.
Before he sets off on this trip, he is um, a celebrity sailor. What were his early successes, and how did they kind of gear him towards this third voyage?
Right. Well, one of the things I love about Captain Cook is that, unlike so many officers in the Royal Navy, he really rose from nothing by virtue of his own skills, his own his work ethic. He was a farmer's son who was going to be a farmer himself if he didn't do something radically different. And he left the his he grew up in Yorkshire, and he apprenticed under Quaker shipbuilding building concerns, and rose up through the ranks of the merchant marine first, then decided to join the Navy. He rose up very quickly, meteoric rise through the Navy. Mainly, what they saw in him was a methodical nature, a very precise way of running a ship, and also a map maker. He had this unbelievable skill as a map maker, and of all of his many skills, I think that still remains the most impressive. Working with what we would now consider quite crude tools, he was someone who could map a coastline uh, with unbelievable accuracy and make a beautiful and precise map. During the French and Indian War, as we call it, they call it the Seven-Year War. He mapped much of the St. Lawrence Seaway, which helped the British defeat the French. Um, and then he mapped the entire coastline of Newfoundland, which is, if you've ever seen it, it's the most indented and most glacially, complicated coastline maybe on Earth. And there's an amazing BBC documentary where they superimpose his map over a GPS kind of
Hmm.
map taken from space, and it's chillingly accurate. So he really had the attention now of the Admiralty and the Navy, and he had these two other voyages, which were designed to do multiple things. The British were especially fascinated by this notion. A lot of scientists had put forward this theory that there was a massive continent. There had to be a massive continent in the southern hemisphere somewhere, bigger than Australia, bigger than Antarctica, which hadn't been found yet. Um, it was crazy theory. Basically, the preponderance of land masses in the northern hemisphere meant that there had to be an equal and opposite preponderance of land masses in the south, or else the planet would be sort of top heavy and would wobble off
Just
into
tipping
outer
around.
space.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It sounds crazy, but
Rolling over on its side. Yeah.
right. And many of the leading theorists and astronomers, physicists believe this. So he was sent down there to find it. And it was called Terra Australis Incognita. It was not found by Cook. It's never been found. Yes, and he got very close to Antarctica and sort of intuited its existence. He said, there may be land down there, but it's inhospitable, it's frozen. Uh, and it's certainly not this continent that they were looking for, which was supposed to be populated by millions of people and was going to be the last great discovery of a landmass on Earth. So he comes back to England having essentially proven its non-existence, what we call negative discovery, not finding the thing that is widely presumed to be there by all the leading scientists. Along the way, though, on his voyages, a number of things. He did discover many, many islands, uninhabited islands. He did become the first European discoverer to locate many, many islands of Polynesia, populated, of course, by Polynesians. He produced incredible maps. He encountered many, many species of animals and plants that had never been seen before. He published all this stuff in these huge volumes, circulating knowledge around the world. It was kind of this golden period. The French and the English had been fighting, and then they set aside their weapons and uh, concluded a treaty. And this brief period of discovery where they weren't fighting each other, they were actually going out and learning things and studying other cultures and then publishing it all. So that he just happened to come along at the perfect time for this kind of enlightened form of exploration.
And in your view, why were maps so essential to opening the door to an empire, to conquest?
Yeah. Well, obviously, you know, discovery and exploration is the first phase of colonial conquest. I mean, you got to find these places first before you rape and pillage them. Um, and he, of course, understood that. Although I think when you read his journals, you get the sense that he is less interested in the imperial game, the big chess game that's going on, and more interested in solving geographical puzzles. What do these lands look like? What are their contours? Is that an island? Is that a peninsula? Is that a continent? Is that he's trying to solve really big questions in areas of the map that are completely blank. Um, the other thing about maps, though, is up till Cook's time, and this is another unique thing about his voyages, they didn't have this thing called the marine chronometer. And the marine chronometer was a little tool that allowed Cook, starting on his second voyage, to know precisely his longitude. And now, they had already kind of figured out latitude. Longitude was a little more complicated. This little tool enabled him to precisely locate things. He now knew precisely where he was in the world. His maps were that much more accurate. He essentially is then broadcasting the precise location of all these islands that had lived for hundreds, if not thousands of years in blissful isolation from the world. And so that the next people, the next discoverers or the whalers or the sealers or the later the missionaries can come back right back to this place, not just to the general area, but the precise bay where they're supposed to anchor, and this accelerates, of course, the whole process of colonialism to a great degree.
What were the stated goals of his third voyage?
Third voyage was mainly um, okay. So the British had an obsession with this thing we now know as the Northwest Passage. They had for hundreds of years been looking for some sort of shortcut over or through Canada, connecting the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean so that they could get to India, China, for trade purposes, and thus avoid the Spanish and the Portuguese that had at least nominally, controlled the southern waters around South America. And that long voyage around the Horn or around the Cape of Good Hope uh, was dangerous in and of itself, but also the Spanish, they didn't want to encounter the Spanish. So they had been looking for this Northwest Passage, always going from the Atlantic to the Pacific, usually, up around Greenland. Um, Inevitably, they had gotten frozen, stuck in the ice, cannibalism, scurvy, just all the horrible stories and so many people had suffered and died looking for this grail. Um, on this mission, they got this idea. I don't know why they thought this would turn out any differently, but the Admiralty said, well, why don't we look for the Northwest Passage from the other side of the planet? Let's go to the Pacific, go up around what we now call Alaska. They didn't know what was up there. Bering had two expeditions in that neck of the woods, but his maps were very poor and sketchy. So the Admiralty wanted Cook to go up through the Bering Strait over Alaska and try to sail to England, finding that, I guess this way we kind of call it a Northeast Passage over Canada. It was a huge Parliament offered a huge award if he succeeded, um, monetary award. It would have been the crowning achievement of his already very illustrious career. And, what was also very interesting is that, you know, as the Revolutionary War is heating up in July of 1776, as you alluded to at the beginning, the British are sending their best explorer to the other side of that same continent to explore the northwest coast of North America. And it takes them 4 years, over 100,000 nautical miles, and a lot of things happen along the way.
Before we get to what goes wrong on this journey, and it's a lot, I want to just ask about you a little bit here. You kind of wrote this book as there is a sort of reassessing of the legacy of James Cook. What had been his reputation and what's happening to it now?
Yeah. Well, the British certainly elevated Cook to near they nearly deified him after he died as their greatest explorer, and a kind of a martyr to the age of discovery. And in one of the ways that they honored him was to erect statues all over the place. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and of course England and elsewhere. And he was in Australia, became something of a kind of foundational figure, like almost like a founding father, because he did along the way discover or at least explore the east coast of Australia and mapped it. The area that where most of the population of Australia is, Sydney and that, all the way up the coast. So his statues are all over Australia, for example. He was the subject of operas and plays and books and hagiographies, mostly, biographies where he was celebrated as the greatest, the GOAT. And maybe he was the GOAT. By the way, I kind of have decided that he's certainly in the pantheon. He may be, certainly in the top five nautical explorers of all time by lots of different metrics. Um, but um, but in recent years, certainly in the last 30 years or so, um, there has been this reckoning going on, reassessment of all sorts of explorers and conquistadors and various agents of change that came with colonialism and imperialism, and so his statues have been coming down. They've been
And defaced and painted on and all that.
Yeah, vandalized, ripped down, literally ripped down, tossed into the sea by various, mostly sort of indigenous groups.
They want to rename the islands. I think that
Yeah, the
they're
Cook
named
Islands,
after. Yeah.
that hasn't happened yet, but they're. And by the way, Cook didn't name the Cook Islands after himself. They were named later, but probably by the Admiralty. Um, One of the things I love about Cook is that wherever he went, he usually tried to use an indigenous name if he definitively found one. And he never named a single thing after himself, which was unbelievable back then because that was the prerogative of an explorer. Name it
Yeah,
after
that's the
my
whole
wife,
point.
name it after my kids, name it. So Cook was pretty modest in that sense, and I admire that. Um, but this reassessment is, I think, was necessary and overdue, but also perhaps the pendulum swung a little too far in the other direction because for his time, for his sort of station in life, he was an incredibly sympathetic observer of these cultures, an incredibly understanding and inquisitive man, a scientist really at heart, I think, who, when you read his journals, I mean, he's not judging these people. He's not using the word savages or he's not trying to convert them to Christianity. He doesn't seem to think his culture is superior to theirs. Um, he writes in a very neutral way about these people, almost like an anthropologist or a ethnographer would, sort of like, this is what they wear.
Hmm.
This is how they worship their gods. Their gods aren't any better or worse than ours. Um, this is what they eat. This is what their canoes look like. This is what their dwellings look like. And
He's
I just
gathering information as
yeah,
opposed to pointing at them.
I think it's wonderful and unusual for his times because most of these explorers, even if they took the time to write about these cultures, it was usually disparaging and patronizing.
You write about adventure, trips to the North Pole, wars, what it's like to be at war, cowboys, even a manhunt to find James Earl Ray, which I've put a James Earl Ray, which I've put on my list. By the way, I'm gonna read that one. How do you decide on your topics?
Well, I'm still trying to figure that one out. I would probably need a shrink or something to really understand it. Part of it is, uh, I have enough books now that I can look backwards and sort of see a pattern, see a little bit of a path that I seem to use. I mean, obviously, I'm looking for. It seems like most of my books are about men, groups of men in extreme situations, either in war or the edge of war, or in some sort of survival situation, or uh, on an expedition where they're far, far from home and all the advantages of civilization, where people have to figure out how to get through an ordeal, summoning whatever strengths they may find within themselves, um, often strengths they didn't know they had, to survive, to get to the other side. That seems to be a theme I keep returning to. Um, but in terms of when I get really down to deciding to do a book or not, I always say that they're kind of like two sets of criteria that I use. One is rational and normal and ordinary. It's basically, is it a good story? Does it have a good beginning, middle, end? Are the characters great? Does it have good primary material? Um, uh, all those little boxes you need to check. Any writer has to check, I think, to make sure the story um, has those attributes. But the other side of the ledger is completely irrational and almost kind of magical. It's just that feeling you get when you learn about a story for the first time, and you kind of get the hair on the back of your neck stands up, and I think most writers get this at some point. You fall in love with the thing, and you say, "Yeah, I want to do this, and I can spend the next 5 years of my life thinking about it and researching it and traveling." That's the magical side of the coin.
How did you, how do you build the scenes that are in this book? It sounds like some of them came from all oral histories. I just took one early passage in the book. I said, I quoted, "On the night the ships appeared, some fishermen were out on the ocean working by torchlight. One of them, a man named Mapua, hope I got the name right, was bewildered by what he saw. An enormous silhouette approached, rising high above the surf, fire burning at its top." How do you
Uh,
put those scenes together?
yeah, well, that comes from so uh, oral history is really tricky, right? Like I use it throughout the book, but I'm very careful about how I use it, and I'm much more inclined to use oral history that was taken down um, closer to the events. I can't remember what I had for breakfast yesterday, right? Let alone what my great 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 grandmother felt on a certain day, in the 1700s. The missionaries who came to Hawaii in the early 1800s uh, very quickly made literacy a goal, and they trained Native Hawaiians uh, once they learned to read and write. They trained them to go out into the hinterlands of the islands and take down oral history taken down in the early 1800s. These would be people whose parents, people who might have been alive during Cook's time, or perhaps their parents. So much closer to the events. And that particular scene that you read comes from an amazing native historian named Samuel Kamakaua, who went to Kauai and interviewed people and wrote this stuff down about what their first impressions were of Cook's ships. So all of that comes from Kamakaua, who's got reams of stuff, really amazing stuff, actually.
And you narrowed down how. You said there's reams of stuff. What do you
Yeah.
look for, and how do you take that and put it into a few sentences?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I began what you just read, for example, that's sort of the beginning of the book, and I thought it was the magical moment of first contact, where anything is possible in both directions. I think Cook's men were equally astonished. They couldn't believe they'd stumbled on this beautiful island in the middle of the Pacific that wasn't on any of their charts. And certainly the Hawaiians were astonished by these ships. Never seen anything like it. They were just they'd never seen so much metal and the size of the ships, the size of the sails. So I just thought, that's obviously a very important moment to capture and use the oral history. Um, some of the oral history involves really complicated cultural things involving their religion, or the taboo system. Some of that stuff just ended up on the cutting room floor because really, what I decided this book was about, it's not a biography of Captain Cook, and it's not you know, uh, it's not a sort of cradle to grave look at his life or anything like this. What this book is about is a single voyage. The main character is a voyage. You know how any trip we go on, a road trip, it kind of has its own character. It twists and turns and ups and downs, and it has its own atmosphere, sort of like. And I think so. For me, in writing this book and trying to figure out how to use the material, I was always conscious of moving on, the next stop, the next twist and turn of a voyage, because the voyage took precedence over everything else.
How do you approach writing about nature and about the sea in an age where so many of us can live our entire lives inside and certainly not going on these kinds of voyages? The world's been discovered for us. Um, Watching movies, and the movies are beautiful, and you don't have to work too hard to imagine what something looks like. Getting a message to somebody on the other side of the planet, it takes as long as it takes for me and you to talk here in the United States over the magic of Zoom. It doesn't take much work in some ways to get out and about. And also, attention spans are so small and so short. How do you approach putting this all together in an age where it's almost like fighting against the exploration of nature right now?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll say one thing is traveling to these places. I'm a big believer in whenever you can, physically go to these places that you're writing about, even if it happened 250 years ago. Um, it gives you an appreciation. It gives you some sense of what it looks like and feels like. You have to do a lot of squinting sometimes because things have changed in 250 years. But I mean, there are a lot of scholars, I believe, who think that, I don't need to go there. Like I can use photographs and GPS and you know, Google Earth and I can approximate it. Why don't I just stick to the archives and do my thing? But to me, it's first of all, it's the most fun part of the research is getting to travel to these places, particularly with Captain Cook, because he had an uncanny knack for anchoring in really beautiful places, extraordinarily beautiful places that I, of course, had to go to. And my wife also wanted to join me on most of these trips, unlike some of my other previous books. So that's part of it. Yeah, physically going to these places, I think is really important. You know, I, I'd like to think I'm a pretty sort of sensory writer. I'm when I'm reading the material, the raw stuff, the primary material, I'm looking for smells and, you know, the feel of things and the taste of things. Those are things that can make a passage come alive on the page. I try to make it as sensory as possible, so that you are there. You, the reader. I try to put you there as much as I can. So it's sort of instead of being analytical or argumentative, it's immersion. It's an immersive experience. If I'm doing my job right, that's what I'm trying to do.
Aside for how many copies are sold, and of course, every author wants copies sold, or awards that it wins, or bestseller lists that it's on, how do you judge the success of a book that you've written?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I will say with this book, it did a whole lot better than I could have imagined. It's a book about a captain from 250 years ago who wore a tricorn hat and a wig, and like stodgy guy who apparently is pretty controversial today, but it did great. It did great. It made Obama's list, and
Yeah,
uh,
that's cool,
and,
huh?
I think at times called it one of the top five nonfiction books of the year, one of the top 10 books of the year.
Did you go
So
wild when it was on the Obama list?
it, yeah, it was great. It was great. I
Did you
was
have any warning or did you just see it?
no,
Yeah.
someone sent it to me, maybe my publicist. And I've since tried to reach out to him to thank him. I was actually just on Oahu where he lives and try to track him down, but he's kind of
Yeah.
busy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's a
And
busy
is it
guy.
not that easy to get near?
No, he is not. Um, but then I look back at my other books and I go, well, I think every one of my other books is just as good as this one, and many of them didn't do as well. And I think that I've decided that my favorite book, which is In the Kingdom of Ice, it's another exploration tale, is my favorite of my books. It didn't sell as well, and it didn't win any prizes. I think it got nominated for some things, but um, it's I think it's a perfectly my most perfectly executed book, and I love the way it came together. And so how do you judge? Yeah, how do I judge success? For me, I just I just think I hit it hits on all cylinders, and and the fact that it didn't sell as well is kind of irrelevant, because in my own
Mhm.
mind, it's my best effort
All right.
somehow.
So when Captain Cook gets to Hawaii, what happens?
Cook goes to Hawaii twice. He
And
first,
from England, by the way, that is quite a voyage. I mean,
yes, yes.
that's even harder than by plane.
Um, it's months after months after months. I mean, they go around the Cape of Good Horn, South Africa. They go to a place called the Kerguelen Islands, which is way the hell down there in the Southern Ocean. Then they go to Tasmania and make a stop. Then they go to New Zealand. Then they go thread through the Cook Islands, what we call the Cook Islands. They may change their name. Um, Tonga.
They would have been better off just landing in North Carolina and carrying the boat to California and keep going.
Right. Practically, yeah. And of course, we didn't have a Panama Canal then. Um, but they then they go through Tonga, and then those islands, a bunch of other islands, and they go to Tahiti. I do a lot of things there, and then al- on the way to Alaska, they stumble upon the island, the Hawaiian Islands, Kauai. So his first stop on Kauai is pretty good. Things go pretty well. There's trade. There's peaceful relations for the
And
most part.
the natives are fascinated too.
Absolutely fascinated. And what they're most fascinated by is metal. Uh, they have seen little scraps of metal on shipwrecks, driftwood, things like that. But here, this ship comes in with all these tools and guns and knives and all this metal on the ship itself, and they know how valuable it is. It's not just that they're obsessed with it or something like that. They understand practically, what this stuff can do. And so they start, they steal and this kind of is a premonition for what's to come when Cook comes back to Hawaii. They start stealing a lot of stuff from the ship, little petty thefts for the most part. Anyway, so Cook, Cook's like, this is amazing. This whole archipelago is here. No one knows about it. He files it away, like, I got to come back to this place. And then he goes to Alaska and does this exploring along the coast of Alaska, maps the entire contours of the subcontinent of Alaska. But nearly gets crushed by the ice up there. And then he says, "All right, well, I don't know what I'm going to do now. I don't know how to spend the winter. Certainly don't want to be up here in the cold. So why don't we go back to that amazing island? Islands plural, 5,000 miles, 4,000 miles away." So he does. He goes all the way back to Hawaii. And in this time, he falls in on the coastline of the Big Island, um, and ends up on the west coast, the Kona coast of the Big Island, where he finally anchors. And that is where the things get interesting.
And he has this change where instead of being this sort of gentle observer, there's this violent streak that comes out.
Yeah.
How do you explain this clash that occurs? And he ends up being, as best I can tell, very violently killed.
Biographers and even sort of forensic minded or even doctors have speculated, like, what is going on with Cook. He is a different man from his first two voyages. Something is wrong with him, maybe physically, uh, or mentally or spiritually. um, he is violent, and his great skill had always been diplomacy and reasoning with people and crossing that void between two cultures in a very um, shrewd way, and he seemed to have lost all of that. Um, the leading theory, which I think is probably a very it's probably correct, is that he had parasites from all of his travels, from all the weird foods he'd been eating. These explorers in their gut had all kinds of parasites. Um, and you can just sort of imagine. Over time, it leads to the depletion or the lack of absorption of critical vitamins and minerals and can cause all kinds of behavioral problems and brain damage. Um, we know this is a fact, can be true. Just look at RFK Jr. These parasites can cause behavioral problems. But anyway, that's the leading theory. Some people have suggested that he had syphilis, which was very common. He could have contracted it early in his life when he was in Canada. Um, but when he gets to the Big Island, and comes ashore. He happens to arrive at the height of a festival called the Makahiki, which celebrates the god Lono um, at the temple dedicated to the god Lono. They bring him ashore. They bow down to him. They bring him into the temple. He becomes the centerpiece of this elaborate ritual ceremony. And they seem to think, at least for a time, that he may be this god returned, according to all the legends. He was supposed to return in these huge ships, um, navigating across, circumnavigating the island, just in the way that Cook happened to approach the island. So he gets treated very well at first, like a god, right? But then he realizes he's overstaying his welcome and he leaves. And two days later, he encounters a gale which snaps the foremast of his ship, and he realizes he can't fly, he can't sail back to Alaska. He's got to turn around, go back to that same bay, and repair his ship. So he comes back, and the people are confused. Like, what are you doing here? The Makahiki festival is over. You're a god out of season. And furthermore, your ship's broken, so you can't be a god. If they ever thought he was a god, they seem to have changed their opinion. And from then on, everything is different. A bunch of things are stolen, including this rowboat. And Cook loses it completely and marches ashore one morning to try to kidnap the king of Hawaii and haul him back onto his ship and hold him for ransom until he can get his rowboat back. Um, but this is the king of Hawaii is a very powerful man and also considered a god with a huge army and bodyguards. So you can imagine when this all starts to happen, plus the language barrier and the cultural gaps between the two societies, things get out of hand in a real hurry. They escalate very quickly, and there's a brutal scene on the lava flats of of the bay there, where four Marines are killed, as many as 20 Hawaiian warriors are killed. Cook is brutally killed. I mean, he's essentially just bashed and slashed to pieces. And the ships are just far enough away in the bay that they can watch it through their eyepieces, but they can't do anything about it. So it's almost like a piece of theater right in front of them. They're watching their captain get slaughtered and murdered, and he's dismembered, and his bones are spread all over the island. It becomes a very gruesome story. And here's one kind of irony to it all is that there was a moment where he could have saved himself. Um, when things were escalating and there was a canoe, there was one of his small boats was out just very close. All he could have done is jumped in the water and swum over to his safety, except for one little detail, and that is that he did not know how to swim. This
He
greatest
spent
of all
all that
nautical,
time on the water
yeah,
and couldn't swim.
this greatest of all nautical explorers could not swim. And what's weird is that this was typical of the Navy at the time. They did not require sailors to learn how to swim, which just seems so bizarre. Um, I think they had this attitude, well, you're probably going to drown anyway. Why prolong the misery? Just get it over with. Sink like a stone. Um, anyway,
Um,
a
you
little bit of
say
a
that
digression.
you say that he became a symbol of colonialism, not for what he necessarily did, but for what happened after him. What
Yeah.
happened after him? How did he become the symbol of English colonialism?
Well, his incredible maps and his incredible volumes that were all published just disseminated all this knowledge all over the world, not just to the British, but to the French and the Dutch and all the other European colonial nations about the existence of these places, and fixed them, pinpointed them on the maps of the globe, and it allowed it for the next wave of occupiers, the navies, the armies, um, to descend on these places. And of course, they spread diseases. These are islands that where the people had very little immunity to all kinds of European diseases. That was really the first wave of destruction, was just the germs.
Hmm.
I guess we get after that we kind of get the guns, germs, and steel kind of thing happening. The conquest of all these islands. Of course, the British turn Australia into a penal colony, which then becomes the country. Um, and of course, the Aboriginal people of Australia are understandably not happy about that. I think that it's almost like they had to find one person to protest. Like, it's not easy to protest great forces of nature, or great forces of colonialism, um, all the waves of people who came after him. It's easier just to focus your ire
Right.
on the first guy, the guy who found the thing in the first place.
How did
And
the boat get back to England, by the way? Did there was like a vice captain who said, "Oh, we got to bring this thing back now
yeah,
that our journey's been shattered."
yes. Well, there's actually two ships. The Resolution is the main ship, but then there's a consort ship called the Discovery. And these two ships, composed of 180 men, uh, you know, they don't know what to do. Their captain has just been murdered. The number two guy rises to become the captain. His name is Clark. It's a little confusing, Clark and Cook. Clark is a very seasoned captain himself. He decides to take the ships back to Alaska to try to look one more time for, maybe the ice won't be so bad this season, and they'll look one more time for the Northwest Passage. They almost get caught in the ice again. He realizes it's futile. Um, he is sick, quite sick with tuberculosis, and then he dies and is buried on Kamchatka in Russia. Uh, so now we have a third captain who rises to the fore, and his name is John Gore. What's interesting about him is that he was born and raised in Virginia. He's an American, and he's the one that has to bring the ships home. And when they finally go around the world, they go past Japan, and um, they go past Indonesia and work their way to Cape Town and around the up the Atlantic, and finally get back to England in 1781. And all these Americans on board the ship, there's a number of sailors on the ship who are American, including John Gore. They hadn't gotten the memo about the revolution and how it was going, and they had to make a decision once they got to port. Who am I? Am I an American or am I British, under whose flag I've been flying for the sailing for the last 4 years? So yeah, John Gore does get the two ships home. Amazingly, no one had died of scurvy, which is in itself an incredible accomplishment. Um, but they didn't have their captain, the original captain.
I'm lucky enough to have been to Hawaii, and it is an amazing place. And it's cool because you get a sense of life pre-America. The food is there, the culture is there, the people are there. It's a really fascinating place. How do you view Hawaii today after having written this book and understanding this first contact?
Yeah. Yeah, I was just there for a month last month, which I loved, except for that I was in the middle of a historic storm, unbelievable power outages and homes swept away, cars bobbing upside down in water. It was like a whole different side of paradise that I didn't know about. But I love Hawaii. I think it's an extraordinary, extraordinary place. Um, there is, of course, especially on the Big Island, a pretty vocal um, and uncompromising sovereignty movement. You know, they want the Americans out of there, and they wish the British had never come. Um, and I think it's unrealistic at this point. I don't think that it's actually going to happen. I don't think their economy could survive without some connection to the United States. But what an extraordinary place that has, in fact, I think, to an unusual extent, managed to hold on to a lot of its culture. Its
Yeah, I
ceremonies,
felt it there. Yeah, I mean, we went to some traditional celebrations and what have you.
yeah, their cuisine, their ceremonies, their their language. You know, so many of the places in Hawaii are bilingual. It's unlike so many places on the mainland of the United States where you would never know that there were Native Americans that had lived there for
Mhm.
millennia. In Hawaii, they have held on, I think, to a greater extent to their original culture, which is great.
How do you think we would change culturally if all of us were forced to take a similar journey? Maybe not as difficult, but sailing to new places with no particular rush to get back.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I think certainly, if you sailed with under the conditions that these guys sailed in, you would probably never
Yeah,
want to do it again.
yeah. No one would be traveling ever again. Yeah,
I mean, I did a little sailing myself um, in the Society Islands around Tahiti in a catamaran with some friends, one of whom was a captain. So I got a sense of voyaging, that was very pleasant and wonderful. Although COVID had just hit the world, and we were sailing around paradise, wondering if the world was going to come to an end, it was kind of a strange disconnect. We thought we're going to get stuck here. We're going to get stuck here in Tahiti, and then we're like, oh, wait a minute, we're going to get stuck here.
literally. Yeah.
That's all right. No, no. I think that, obviously I'm a big believer in travel. I think in both directions. I think, you learn from a culture and hopefully the people you're visiting learn from you. But it comes with unintended consequences. It comes with, we need to be very careful where we step. People, I think, didn't realize. And one of the things I admire about Cook is that he does write repeatedly in his journal about how he's not sure whether these voyages are good for these people that he's visiting because he sees their changes. He sees how their economy changes. He sees some new diseases that he hasn't seen before in these islands. He begins to realize that European visitation is not all good. Um, it's this cross-pollination um, is a wonderful thing, but it also comes with a lot of damage.
What do you think of the moon voyage that we just watched those
Yeah.
astronauts take? Do you view it in a certain context, just given how much you've studied this particular journey?
Well, I was obviously, I mean, it was the only piece of really good patriotic news that week or that month, or maybe this year, at least in uh, my world. We were all rooting for them. We were so I think also relieved when they all came home alive. Um, It's a little different though, in the sense that, except for that few minutes when they passed on the dark side of the moon, they were always in communication with
Right,
the world. And if you could
right,
imagine when Cook and the explorers of his day left their port, they no one heard from them for 4 years.
right.
They didn't in turn hear from the world. So it's They were on the dark side of the moon, essentially, for all that time. We have to remind ourselves of just how hard that must have been. How and going to these different islands where they did not know what they would encounter was kind of like going off into the solar system, like
Right.
going a little bit like Star Trek. In fact, um, Captain Cook is believed to be the kind of basis uh, for Captain Cook, Captain Kirk. Cook's first ship was the Endeavor. Captain Kirk's ship was the Enterprise. Going where no man has gone before is a paraphrase from Captain Cook. They did kind of feel like they were going from planet to planet or star to star as they moved about these islands, not knowing, were they friendly people? Would they trade with us? Could we, would there be some kind of strange virus or some strange disease? Or, it's like it was truly going into the unknown. And I think that as wonderful as that voyage was last month, it didn't really have that element of like going truly into the unknown. Um, they're dealing with technical issues, and I think they had a problem with their toilet, and uh, there were obviously a lot of lessons learned from that voyage, but um, it didn't actually have that element of the complete going into the complete unknown that existed during the age of exploration.
Your dedication is to Anne Almighty with all my love. I assume that's your wife, I guess.
Yes.
Why did you want to make sure this book was dedicated to her?
Well, um, she mentioned to me when I was thinking about this, what's my next book? She said to me something like, you always do these books that involve travel to all these places that I don't want to go to. I don't.
How does Hawaii sound? Yeah.
I was like, I did a book set in North Korea. I did a book set way up in the Russian Arctic in Siberia, um,
Did you
remote
travel
islands.
there? Did you travel to
Yes,
Siberia? Oh, you did.
yes,
Wow.
yes. And
I can't imagine why she didn't want to go.
yeah, and I mean, she's an adventurous traveler, and she's also a writer and a journalist, but she didn't particularly want to go to those places.
Yeah.
She said, "Why don't you pick a book for your next book that involves travel to places that I'd want to join you on, and we could go, have an adventure. Kids are grown up, empty nest." And so I'd never thought of it like you could sort of reverse engineer it and pick a book that involves great travel. And 3 days later, I think I got back to her and said, how about Captain Cook? And she's like, where'd he go? And I'm from Tonga,
Right.
uh, Tahiti. And she's like, I like the sound of that. But it became obvious that I wasn't going to do three voyages. And,
Right.
I needed to pick one. And pretty quickly became apparent that it would be the third. There had never really been a good book written about just the third voyage. It's the most American of his stories because it happens during the Revolution, and there are Americans on board, and a lot of the
He
action
dies at the
happens.
end. There's an exclamation point. Yeah.
Yeah, it just jumped out at me, and she did come with me on almost every one of the trips, and so she was my constant companion. She was my first reader of this book, and I couldn't have done it without her. So that's why I dedicated it to Anne Almighty.
Have you picked the next topic? Where is she going next?
We're back to not the greatest travel kind of story. You can only do those so often. Um, I'm on dry land now, very much terrestrial. It's another Western. I wrote a book 20 years ago called Blood and Thunder about the life and times of Kit Carson and the conquest of the American West. And this is kind of a sequel to that. It's set in Colorado during the Civil War. It's about the Cheyenne and Arapaho Indians, the gold rush, the creation of Denver, and a horrible event known as the Sand Creek Massacre. So that is what I'm working on now, and I'm spending a lot of time up in Colorado, also in Oklahoma, interviewing descendants of the tribes, and I'm loving it. It's great. It's just a very different kind of book, very much dry land.
Hampton Sides, the author of The Wide, Wide Sea, Imperial Ambition, First Contact, and The Fateful Voyage, of Captain James Cook. Thanks so much for being here.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Check out the book and also his website, hamptonsides.com. axlebankhistory.com is designed by Nikki Rideout of Ellie Claire Designs. It has our most recent episodes, our featured episodes, and a link to that Patreon page. So check out Nikki's work. I also want to invite listeners to go to that Patreon page to ask for your support in keeping the show going. Go to patreon.com/axlebankhistory. We will donate part of your contributions to a charity for children's literacy. And thank you for listening to Axlebank Reports History and Today, conversations with America's top nonfiction authors and why their books matter right now. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Axlebank History. We'll see you next time. Thanks.